Well, thank you everybody for joining us for one more conversation in our series as we talk about things that touch us, especially from the world of human-centered thinking. And today's topic is a little bit unusual, and so I'm also curious to see what the audience also thinks about it. And so we've been talking about this internally for a while about the idea of how do you humanize our work life. But just to kick us off, I'll just ask Dilip. The topic really is called, uh, it's not just business. It's actually personal. And can you elaborate a little bit more about that for us so that it frames the discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a very elastic topic. So I'm sure many people would have read it very differently about the topic. So just to clarify, this is not so much about work-life balance, and there's so much being written and talked about that subject. But this is about how do we bring our rich life experiences into work, and how do we personalize work? I mean, we rarely see that happening at workspace because by the time you start our careers, I mean, we are like 2 decades into life. I mean, you experienced a great 20 years of your life. By the time you start your work, you pretty much segregate life and work, and even your identity shift from who you are to what you do. And very rarely there is an osmosis that happens between life and work. And the question would be, why is that important? And we thought it's an interesting topic to explore, at least, and start the conversation because at workspace, the reason why you really don't bring anything from your life is because, first of all, we underestimate this life experience. So somebody who starts their work, they're pretty much starting as a rookie. Even in the office space, they're seen as somebody with no experience. But you really sit back and look at that 20 years of experience. It is very distinctive and unique real life experience. This is not something which we read in books, but it's something which we have gone through. And all of us will have this buckets of experience, but the experience will be very distinctive. So to start with, the kind of families that we have, the kind of siblings, the parents, the family dynamics, whole host of experience lies there. And many times, who we are in terms of our strengths, our values, our beliefs, our perspective about this world, all of that it's somewhere in that space, the first 7, 8, 9 years of our upbringing. And then there is our college life, the peer group, the teachers that we interact with, and later on the adventures and the escapades that we have been through, romance and relationship, the kind of conflicts and negotiations, and being a salesperson to yourself and to others. Apart from that, you would have cultivated interest and passions. It could be in the area of literature, music, arts, all of that. And apart from, and also observing life around you. And this is a complex network of experience. And if you really sit down and look back at your memories, because memories are what? I mean, they are experiences which will have either a positive or negative impact on your life. And you start writing down just your memories. Don't even think about what it is, but like stories. You will find this wide canvas of experience. Okay. So the first problem that I feel, like when I started my career, we underestimate this experience. We think that is not really useful. It is something which is very personal. But this professional space and our entire attempt to be unique and to stand out and everything, we pretty much start focusing on our craft, on our skill, which is very important. So you look at role models, you look at the models and frameworks of that skill that you're trying to master. You read books in that space and all of that. And at some point of time, the complexities of the workspace is no different from what we face in life. And if you could have borrowed some of those experiences, if you could have had the confidence to have the osmosis between our life experience and work, the work actually could become very rich. It's not only that, our search for this uniqueness in our work, to stand out, to be different, to be self-expressed, to be authentic, all this answers lies in this life experience, but somehow we realize it after traveling maybe a decade or decade and a half into our work. And then we start realizing actually this entire plethora of experience which we have in our kitty, when I start marrying is where both becomes unique.
Mm.
So I think that's broadly the topic by looking into saying how can we bring our personal experience into work, and how does work really get enriched?
Mm. I'm also wondering, is this, I mean, normally, yes, when you're very young at your workplace, you're trying to find your balance and you're trying to figure out how I fit in, etc. Is it easy to actually bring your personal experience to work? What would really be holding us back? Is it the fear, or is it almost like a? I feel like is there a conditioning that happens, and maybe this is not expected in the workplace, you know? And maybe that's why even the workplace tries to segregate what you do at work, and then there is the after hours camaraderie of the pub or whatever else, which is where colleagues and superiors can quote unquote let their hair down, and that's seen as almost like a corollary, almost like in Indian high schools erstwhile it would have been thought of extracurricular activities, but it's off curriculum. Is there a feeling like that? Do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's not necessarily to the workspace. It is the way our schooling system itself is designed. And we have designed for an industrial economy where elimination and specialization is what is looked for. So when you're young, your mind pretty much works like a cathedral. I
Mm.
mean, it's like this open space and everything intermingles and interacts with each other. So you're interested in nature, through that you learn mathematics, and through that you learn history. Everything is, intermingled. You don't, so the entire idea is to integrate and expand when you're young. That's why you're curious when you're young.
Mm.
You're the kind of questions you ask are so creative when you're young because you don't see these compartments. The moment you start schooling, your mind starts looking like a classroom. So there is social sciences, there is mathematics, there is physics and chemistry. It all gets segregated, and there is no osmosis which happens between it. And for maybe 30 years back, that really made sense because you're catering to the system where you have a predictable job, you have a routine job, and specialization really makes sense. And anything you borrow from other fields could be a distraction. Actually, it comes in the way of productivity. But the way the world is going today, which is actually chaotic, and see what is happening even now, and you need disruptive thinking. And if you, the more you cross fertilize different subjects, or you have a richer experience, or you have wider interest, and you bring those things together, is when magic starts happening. Is happening. The coming back to your question, why we don't. One is this conditioning itself, which is happening. I think it's changing with the startups, and a lot of the disruptions which we see are people who disrupt the industry from outside, because when you're inside you have so much of boundaries and you don't see the connection. The same problem of a specialization. Or there is a lot of talk about polymaths, who actually integrate
Mm.
multiple subjects into the core area of specialization, and how newer solutions to problems happens. So one is the conditioning itself. Second is we ourselves don't really realize the experience that we have gone through. It is a really rich and myriad experience, but unless you sit down and reflect on it. So if you think about the stories that you tell people. When you met your woman first, when you're quoting her, what are the kind of stories you told? When you met your friend, what are the kind of stories you told? You have a narrative.
Mm.
You build that narrative, but you don't consciously sit and put down your stories. If you start putting down the stories, you start seeing principles behind those stories, and you need to have a conscious effort to do that. That's one. Second is we have a feeling that anything personal, if you bring it to the professional space, it actually makes us very vulnerable. It is very juvenile. This place is supposed to be serious. You're supposed to talk about your skills and the mastery of the skills, and the language has to be very cut and dry and pretty much like military kind. So that is very different from the way we see our lives, and that is some of the reasons why it doesn't happen.
That's fascinating. I was just reflecting on it, at least in our line of work, because you have the opportunity to be a little bit more free. Maybe we always tell you have to bring the personal into the workplace. And we say that, right? At least at center of gravity, the thinking is that the personal has to impact work, and hopefully it'll go vice versa, that the work is enriched by the personal coming in. That's a nice. Always felt like I understood it, even in center of gravity, a few years into the work. While the bumper sticker was always there. How do you bring your person into the work life? But how does one do that? If you're a young person and somebody even tells you, okay, we are interested in your personal life, and like you say, I've gone through the classroom orchestrated conditioning to behave in a certain way in the workplace. My brain saying, no, that I'm judging my own life experience. And like you say, maybe I have not even really understood the depth of the experience because I have not reflected on my own personal life experience as much. How does one start to begin to do those kinds of things? Right? What will be that?
Yeah.
Before you answer that, Dilip, I'm just going to remind people, please, we will stop our discussion. The real questions and discussions have to come from your questions. So there is a Q&A section at the bottom. Please go ahead and start thinking about your questions. The more questions you have, the more fun we have. All of us. Sorry, didn't need to interrupt. Go ahead.
I just lost the thread. What was the question?
So I'm saying, how does one tell somebody young who's been told, okay, your personal has to impact your work life. That's right in theory, but in practice, if I have to do it, is there a manner in which how the personal can come and impact my work life, other than just philosophically agreeing that yes, I have to allow it to happen? How does one actually practically do it?
Yeah. See, like any subject, it needs practice because, as I told you about the conditioning, we need to break the conditioning. Hence, we have to be very consciously start practicing it. So in our work, we consciously start practicing it, and that's how we are able to do it. But that also comes after a decade into our work, and then having confidence to dip into our own experience. So if you look at, first of all, if you can get a sense of how it is useful at work. I mean, they can have argument saying that I will focus on my craft and the mastery of the craft, which is good enough to solve the problems at the workspace. And actually, this can be a distraction. So the counter argument to that is, you can be great at your craft, but the craft usefulness comes only in its application. And the application is always in a chaotic human context because you have to empathize. It can be a team that you're working internally, or you can have a client that you're working with. Even if you're a solo practitioner, still you have to work with this human context, which is very chaotic. Now, you can be great at your craft, but you're not able to manage this human context. It's sort of no use, because there will be politics, there will be negotiations, there will be conflict management. You have to get people together to thinking and align to your way of thinking, convince people, a whole host of things. And if you really look at our life experience, you have n number of situations, which will give you enough and more examples of how to do it. But we don't have the confidence to do it. But even if I'll give you an example personally from my life. So my dad, he had this very interesting way of teaching us perspectives. And this used to happen at our dining table conversation. So he will take a subject, say, autocracy versus democracy. And he will say that you have to argue for democracy. You pick up the topic and you're supposed to learn about the subject. And next day you come and sit on the table and you're actually making your points and you're convinced about your point of view. And then suddenly he will flip. And he says that I will stand for democracy. You now actually work for autocracy. And then you start thinking from a completely different perspective. And I found it very useful when brainstorming session happens to really integrate that, So that's like one. So you can bring those things in your personal work at a very personal level, There was another example. I remember I had this teacher at school, in my college. And we used to really love his sessions. So if I just write a story, I would say that these are the sessions that we all used to look forward to. But you have to really sat and try to distill what was that made it interesting. So the first thing was that he always wove the concept wrapped around stories, which made it more relatable, more enjoyable. So that is a good principle that I could potentially take into my work and say that instead of data, can I really tell stories? The second thing was that whenever we asked questions to that guy, he never answered the questions. He had a counter question, and then the entire class should become like a jazz concert. You're just putting a hypothesis, somebody else is adding to it, and we are contributing to it. We are understanding the subject. It's fascinating. And the third aspect was that whenever he appreciated and when he was criticized, he never did that together. I thought that was an interesting thing. So when he appreciated for what you did, and that's it. And it was a different day or a different context he actually criticized. And at our work, when performance appraisal happens, when there is an appreciation and you know that there is a but or a however going to come, and there is a criticism gets followed, the entire appreciation really falls apart because I'm not listening to it. And these are all things that you have experienced. You can potentially bring it into your life. You can, and the idea is not you're going to get a solution to the problem that you're facing, but it allows different ways to look at the problem or look at the situation. You may try this, it may not work, but that's fine. But you have an armory of experience which is there, which you can potentially, bring into the workspace.
Which is so true. As you're talking and you're talking about people who do very well. When I was much younger in my career, there was a colleague of mine back in the US who used to tell that he wanted to make sure that he wanted to coach like high school team sports. He was a basketball fan and he wanted to go and teach basketball to kids. And he wanted to make sure that when he had kids, he wanted them to participate in team sports. And I think of him, he was incredibly resilient in his own work. Like there'll be failures and successes, etc. But when the failures happened, it always at that young career stage, when a failure really affects you because you're not able to cope with. He coped with it much better than most people. And then he always used to say, "Look, I used to play team sports. I was not very good at playing team sports, but I used to go and play every week." Right? It taught me two things. One, I can get along with people who are very different from me because every week we are going to practice and we are going to play. Second thing is, on any given week, we are going to lose and we are going to feel like hell and we're going to cry even as a child, and then you're going to get up, dust ourselves off. Next week, we'll go back and play. Like, while it was never engineered for success in life, he was immediately able to reflect back on it and tell me why he was the way it is. And I'm sensing that he must have had this personal, while we may not have known the framework, my sense is he must have had self-reflective, deep inquiry into his own strengths and challenges. And he's a guy who was, Korean American, grew up in the middle of rural America, and I'm sure growing up like that would have had challenges. Growing up, he goes and teaches English, he goes and builds churches in Africa, etc. There's a myriad of life experiences before he joined us. And I was thinking he has had such a rich repository of life experience, but my sense is that each one of us would have had that in some big and small shape. And by the time we bring that into our work life, it may be much later in our life, probably when we feel like we either have authoritative control over others, so nobody is going to tell us, why are you talking these stories, because there's nobody to oppose you, maybe, or, only at that point in time, maybe you've gone to some return cycle in your head, so you're capable of telling these stories, which seems nostalgic, but that's not the real power of it. Like you said, even when you join the workplace at 21, 22, you already have 20 years of wisdom and life experience baked into you. People may be actually doing themselves a disservice by not bringing it to work, and therefore they'll be far more powerful. And there has to be a method to be able to do that. Is this a learnable skill? Like, I'm clear we have not done that. I'm just curious, is that some people can do it, as like, some people think creativity, some people are born creative and the others just don't have it in them. Is this something that can be learned?
I mean, if we reflect on at center of gravity how we have practiced, and if you try to decode it, I mean, we have done it intuitively, but if you try to decode it, I mean, I will pose some hypothesis how you can potentially do it. So one is, let's say there's a problem-solving situation. I mean, our life experience can be very useful in understanding the problem, empathizing with the problem. Okay, because you look at all the clients that we have worked with, when they have personally felt something that the customer goes through as a human being. And whenever, so the way our mind works is that whenever we see something outside, you also connect with that experience internally. And that's how you're able to make sense in that. So creativity is what? I mean, combines two disparate things into one and you make sense of it. But if you don't have an internal experience, it's very difficult to connect that. So if there is a customer going through a pain, I would connect with something that I have gone through. It can be my father or my own experience, and then I empathize it with and connect with it. So understanding is a space where you can really draw your rich life experience. So I remember when Rajesh and Sariga had gone to Savile Row,
Hmm.
for one of our clients to understand what is luxury, and their conversation, tailor after tailor, came to the conclusion by saying that it's about attention to detail and really loving what you do and really, observing things really at a very minute detail level. And I remember Rajesh saying that he connected that to the way his mother made idlis. Now that looks completely out of the window, luxury and Savile Row and idlis, and there is no connection. But he felt that the principles were so much the same. The way the entire mix was created, the attention to detail, and the entire process. So his conversation with his mother about the entire process pretty much made him connect to what was happening in a completely different space. And he was able to personalize it. And
Hmm.
once you personalize it, I mean, you understand it in a completely different way. So any subject you take for understanding, if you can refer back to your life experience and if you're conscious about it. But often what we do is that we try to understand through an external source, through a book, through a role model, through some of the best practices. It's brilliant. You can do that, but that is still knowledge, and there is a huge difference between knowledge and understanding. Once you understanding is when the penny falls in your head. So that is, so you can use that one bucket, to bring your life experience. That's one. The second context that we have applied is in the area of referencing. So let's say there is a brainstorming session happening, and in a brainstorming session, if you have to move away from the rational, logical thinking to analogies and metaphors and the absurd kind of area, you need to have obviously an environment which is very trustworthy. Otherwise, people are going to criticize you, and there is a judgment. All of that, hold you back. But if you have that environment, then you start referencing because it becomes like a springboard for you to jump. And there are again many examples. I remember this story of this teacher. She had this particular problem of where the girls in the school used to come apply a really strong red lipstick and come and kiss in the restroom mirrors,
Hmm.
and they put punishment, all of that. Nothing is working. I mean, the helpers will go and clean it. The next day, you will have the same problem. And then she was having for the lunch pizza. And when we were having pizza, she remembered about a pizza outlet in her countryside which got shut down because there was a rumor that it is near a drainage. And people then connected saying that maybe the pizza is not good quality. So there's no connection between them. The next day she calls the girls and she said, see how your janitors are really working hard. Why don't you come and witness it? So they come there and they are actually dipping the entire, the mop into the toilet and taking and wiping the mirror. And then that stop the entire, So there is no connection. There is something of pizza and then there is something that happened and then it connects to, so it's almost like a springboard. And let's say if you're starting your work and there are 5 people in the group, you've got 100 years of experience. And there are so many reference points where you can have to take this leap, the referencing that can happen. And so the example which I talked about, my teacher, I can pretty much reference things like storytelling, maybe lead with questions, don't give appreciation and criticism. So this is all I can reference and I can apply. The third way that we have used is in the area of modeling.
Hmm.
Okay, so I remember when we were doing this brand architecture work, how to really arrange. So you tend to then distill this entire theme by saying that the entire theme is here organizing.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you take organizing and you start thinking, what are the kind of things which comes to your mind when it comes to organizing? And that is where the urban architecture became a principle. Okay, how do cities get planned? Can I use the same principles for, you know, for in the area of brands? So you can, so for instance, let's take COVID. Okay, and you can define COVID in many different ways. Let's say if you say it's pandemic, you'll have very different kind of references. You will go back to the history when it has happened, and you can have a lot of learnings. If you say it is isolation, it is very different. So whenever you are seeing a problem in front of you, you distill the theme the way you see it. Or if I say COVID is disruption, I can start thinking very differently. I can look to I'm interested in art, and let me look at artists who disrupted. What are the principles they applied? So my mind can really go in multiple directions. So some ways to a question. I'm sure it comes only with practice. So first of all, I think the starting point is for you to really, like a diary, to sit down and put down your memories.
Hmm.
And then you have to really look into some of the strongest memories and look at what are the principles. Many times counselors do that. Whenever we have a problem, we know we have a problem, we don't know what is the reason for it. And in counseling, what they're doing is they're really going to your subconscious and trying to pull out this experiential understanding which is within there. We're trying to bring it to the conscious. So the first part is to really put down, your experiences into all these buckets: friends, families, peers, romance, relationship, interests, hobbies, and then really go, because memories are strongly etched because of a reason. And then you go back and think about what made it positive or negative, and you will find principles which potentially then you can apply for understanding, for referencing, modeling, any of those.
It's interesting what he said is that you can't really switch off that part of the brain. If I'm seeing a new problem, my brain is already going to access and tell me this is like that. Now, the
Yeah.
question is whether I am going to actually let it come out and explain it to somebody in front of me that what we are dealing with is essentially that, like almost metaphorically, this is the same thing. And the principles that are in the original world can be brought in and applied to this problem here, almost like, some of those fancy words like biomimicry or whatever else it is. But the real idea is that there are connections probably that your brain's already forging. That's a natural act. And what we may be conditioning ourselves to do is to actually curb it and not really explore that, right? So it's probably a subconscious act that we are actually, if we paid attention to, we could be far more powerful, and the rest of the things might flow. I mean, that's something that I was taking up. Vijay, I'm just being conscious of the time. We are at 6:33. Should we take questions, or do you want us to go on?
You can go on. I think there's one question which Abhimanyu Bharadwaj on Facebook had asked, but I think Dilip answered it a bit.
Okay.
Uh, how do you enable people to apply this life experiences to work? I think you could elaborate that on a bit, or you could go forward.
So, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we touched upon that, but the question is that where do I start?
Hmm.
Now, the reason why in office environments, we are stuck to the logical way of looking at problems is because the environment tends to be highly judgmental and critical in nature. Okay, your value addition comes from saying that why that is not working. Okay, so this can happen only in a trusted environment.
Hmm.
And then the question goes, how does transformation happen? Let's say that I'm in ideation and I'm pretty much focused on my thoughts. Okay, and I'm pretty much married in that space, and if everybody's, that's where there's a lot of resistance, and then you have to bring rational and logical thinking, etc. Right? So for you to really take the lead, you have to practice this in an environment which you feel trusted. So it can be a small group within the office. There is at least one member that you trust and you think you can have absurd ideas, and you can actually start brainstorming with him. Okay. And the more you start appreciating other people's ideas, when you start opening up, is when they will start opening up. It's a natural human tendency. The moment you start resisting, they will start resisting. So that is something that you can practice. And again, you look back at your life by saying that what are the times you felt really trusted, or what are the times that you felt that you created a trusted environment? What are the principles behind it? I mean, this is something which I am just saying, saying that the more it move away from yourself to others, and more you are open-minded. Okay, then what happens is that people start appreciating what you're telling, and they start embracing the idea, and then you're developing the idea, because there is nobody starts off with an idea, right? It is like a stone which you throw into the water. It's a ripple, and then multiple stone happens, and then it becomes a wave. But for that to happen, this environment of trust, this entire thing which we talked about, the chaotic human context, navigate that. And there's a lot of life experience we have, and that's why you should start experimenting this. Because without that environment, it's pretty difficult, because your ideas, the moment your ideas moves into metaphors and analogies and abstraction, people will kill it unless they have the faith or the patience to hold that thread and walk along with you. So that's something you need to practice. And I remember, like, my son just shifted to school last year, and he shifted in the grade 9, which is a very difficult year because friends have got formed and etc. And I was chatting with him. So he said that what I did was that whenever I saw something positive in anyone, I started voicing that. And what happens is that they start voicing it vice versa. And that was how he, and this is a 9th standard kid. I'm sure we have so many experiences in that space, which we can start applying.
Okay. Question from James Campbell. Yeah. Are you suggesting that we should be our genuine self and practice our personal strengths, whether we are in office or outside when addressing challenges?
Yeah. James, my personal view is, you should be your authentic and personal self, because from my experience, I have found that it comes really later in life, but that's where your uniqueness lies, because we all have a very unique perspective to the world based on who we are and what really shaped us. That nobody can take away from us. So if there is a problem happening in the office, I can have a very unique take. Only thing that I need to have the confidence and conviction that is of value, which comes with age or with a certain kind of an environment, because that's when you tend to be completely self-expressed, and I feel a lot of value comes from sharing that unique perspective at the workspace. I'm sure it's not a common happening, but if you look at people when they are really self-expressed and authentic, there is something powerful. You tend to experience that.
Question from Nitin Vishwanath. So should I ask question, Dilip? You're finished?
Yeah.
Okay. How can large organizations enable self-expression from their workforce? I understand that in smaller organizations like Center of Gravity, there is a very flat structure, so all interactions are personalized. That's the question. How can large organizations enable self-expression?
Yeah, I think it is a complete cultural change, because I think if you took leadership in the last 30 years, the leadership model is about, I know the answers and I will help you navigate this whatever world, and you look up to it. It's like a patriarch, you look up to it, right? But I think in the last 10 years is where the amount of disruptions happened. I mean, even if you take the companies from built to last, I'm not sure how many of them still survive, and the average age of companies have come down, the average tenure of CEOs have come down. So there is a shift in the leadership thinking to start also with this question that we don't know, we need to figure this out. And for complex problems, it looks like specialization is not the way to go, because routine jobs will be taken over by AI and robots and everything. The creative problem solving will come from people with wider interest, and it will slowly, I'm sure, there is a recognition of general management principles or polymaths, etc. Who are able to combine multiple subjects and then solve problems. So I think it will start from leadership, and maybe the newer age organizations functions differently, and that's the reason. If you take the 20s and the 30s and the millennials and the Gen Zs, the kind of companies they're creating, the environment they work, etc. I think it looks like I remember one of them saying that because the fact that I left job and I worked in 2 3 industries actually is a positive today, which ideally would not have seen as a positive 10 years back. So there are changes which are happening, uh, and I, and I hope it becomes a norm. Because I think the environment will force us to think like this. Is my view.
Question from Tulsi, bit similar, but how do marketeers walk this path of making big decisions with huge impact using live drawn experiences versus hardcore data or any other proven methods? Bit similar, but here she's asking specifically how do
A
you.
combination of both data and yeah, Vijay.
No, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
So she's asking, I think, how do marketers walk this path of making this big decisions with huge impact using life-drawn experiences or versus
Versus.
hardcore data? I'm saying it seems
Yeah.
like these are two things.
I think it's not either or. I mean, there is this debate which I have heard about. You take a problem and there is this first principle based thinking, which is you really break down things, logically ask, analyze, which is very important. And you really come to it's that you can't ask the why beyond that, and then you put it together and you solve an issue, right? It's very important. I think you should do that. But then when you have to take a leap, you know, uh, what happens is that the more you start using analogies and metaphors and abstract thinking, where you can combine things from one area to the other, is where magic happens. But in real world, what happens is the data centric kind of decision making is the safest one, because that's what the other one is pretty much in the abstract realm. So it's almost like you have to take the horse to the water, and then the leap from there happens through the life experiences, what you have read, you're cross connecting multiple things. So that's where the magic happens. And if you look at most of the breakthroughs, you will find that some people have tried to combine this thing. Somebody had to combine a trolley with a suitcase to have a suitcase with a wheel, or a telephone, with the entire fax machine invention. So it's not an either or thing, I guess. You have to really understand the problem with all its complexities, and then see what are the out of the box solutions that potentially I can think of.
And I think we may have ended up practicing, at least in the workplace, a lot of the first principle analysis mode of work. Therefore, the leap, then the practice has actually fallen down, at least in the workplace context. That's a possibility for us. Any more questions, Vijay? Otherwise, I want to also touch upon something that
No, I think questions are over. You could.
Yeah, Nitin had also mentioned this, that it's a large organization structure. Therefore, how do you do it in that? I think the organization may be in our mind. Of course, the organization is giant, but who we are interacting with is still a small team on a daily basis. If I let go of the thought that I work in a large organization, therefore the entire organization has a way of working. My team still works with 5, 10, 15 people that I interact with on a daily basis. So the principles still hold. I think something that Dilip mentioned struck a chord in. It's like, how do you build trust? Anybody can create an environment for building trust. Yes, at some level, leaders may have greater power than that, but that's only authoritative power. Trust building power is, like he said, is to give trust and receive it in return. And human beings are conditioned to behave like that, unless you're a sociopath. So usually that will result in the environment potentially for such actions where you can bring your life experience to be shared without the fear of rejection, etc. So that's still in our power to create in some shape and form within our teams. But the more important thing is, this is investment in ourselves. This is going to pay off in making us different, more creative, problem solving over time. The the mathematical formulaic way of behaving, how the workplace is going to do is actually going to only give us incremental growth. So I think it's a life skill to be learned and practiced, and to realize that good things will come for having done it. I think that's what I kind of take away from this whole experience also. I mean, if we really reflect back on times when we were powerful, when we did something magical at the workplace, I would wager if we reflected back on that point, somewhere some life experience of ours has contributed to that to make it stand out. It can't just be doing the formulaic work that we do. Um,
Question from Sovrata.
uh-huh.
Sharing personal stuff could also put us in trouble, especially considering people gossip at workplaces. You never know what people say behind your back, and you never know who's not to be trusted till you are let down. Don't you see that as a risk?
That's a very interesting question, Surata. I think well, at the extreme, it's like falling in love. I think there you're giving trust unconditionally. And I'm talking about love of not the biological relation, parent to child kind of love. I'm talking about romantic love. It's really there. It can't be conditional, at least in our minds, when at least the one person who initiates it. While love is an extreme form of trust, I think giving trust usually tends to get people to reciprocate. I remember watching this TED talk, if you've seen from, I can't remember names and I'll butcher it up, but one of the founders of Airbnb, where he does this by asking everybody in the audience to take out their mobile phones. And he tells them to unlock it. And then he tells them to pass it on to the person sitting to their left. They're obviously strangers. Now you're holding your phone in your hand. And then he asks them, how are you feeling? And each one of them is going through deep anxiety, right, for their own personal phones. Then he asks them the second question, says, how are you feeling about the other person who gave you this phone? They are immediately incredibly responsible not to abuse the power that has been given to them, right, which is the foundation of trust building. If I think of Airbnb, it's almost a business that has been built by fostering trust among strangers. You're letting a stranger come and live with you in your room, in your home, and that is a significant amount of trust that can be done. I don't think the challenge is that our co-workers are going to abuse our trust. And as far as the other concern, that they're going to talk behind our backs at some level, I think they're going to do that anyway, which we do. So I wouldn't worry about so much, but that would be my personal narrative to if that's the concern holding me back from conversing with my colleagues and my co-workers and sharing a little bit of myself. I think that narrative may be more in our head than that our trust will get betrayed. But yes, the first step of trust building is to give trust. It's not to expect that receipt will come. When you give, you will receive is the sense that I have. And that's a very human way of doing it. What do you feel, Dilip?
Yeah, that's one. And or you can look into your life experience and see. I'm sure within families, etc., you've gone through similar situations, right? And how did you manage it? And I'm sure there are learnings from there which you can potentially take and apply it in whatever you are going through and see whether it works or not. So let's say if there are 5 close people you have in that team, there may be 5 ideas each from each one of them, and something will work which you can try out. So this entire hypothesis of trust is one of the things which work. Maybe there are other things. Again, you can dip into your life and see are there enough and more experiences that you have gone through.
But there is an aspect, right? In Subrata's question, she's asked that if you share personal stuff, it could put us in trouble at the workplace, especially because people are different. Is that counter? Is that the way you feel most organizations or workplaces, especially, are conditioning that, like you say, this is not expected. Let's keep these two different, which is the paradox of balancing work and life in some ways, that the two are distant and therefore need to be compartmentalized and kept that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's how most of the workspaces are, because it is a lot of the inspiration for organizations comes from military and those kind of zones. I mean, that's where the inspiration comes from. It doesn't come from nature or softer zones like that. So yeah, I mean, anything which is vulnerable, anything which is humane, is all as seen as weaknesses. Even softer aspects. Like if you reflect on today's conversation, the trust is the most important thing in any of these things to work, which is seen as a very soft area. Empathy, listening, conversation, all of this. So yeah, it will maybe uh, take a generation of leadership to change, and the environment is also forcing organizations to become more human. And that's the hope.
I remember Rajesh always tells that as consultants at a certain level, uh, while we are known for consulting and giving strategy solutions, but leadership tends to look for more than just strategic solutions. They are looking for guidance and beyond the problem they have put in front of us, because leaders are generally lonely. They are really not conversing with others. They don't let their head on. I feel like as much as young people or early career and mid career guys feel like the pressure of not sharing themselves, they may be feeling it equally, because while they have to keep this mask on and not let their human self, vulnerability, their personal invade, it's not like that kind of success is making them in a much more secure space. Is my
Yes, and the irony is that if you go to organizations which have an employee force which has been in the organization for long periods of time, and we have many clients like that, right? People have been in the organization for 10, 20 years. The entire bonding is completely personal. They all know their families, they interact outside, they know their hobbies, and yet in the workspace, you don't come across like that. You don't celebrate that. But in reality, that's how it happens.
It's amazing. I remember once one of our colleagues he said that one of the ways that the new, when somebody new enters into the center of gravity, whether you want to call it induction or how we learn about our space, one of these sessions that is run is a deep personal inquiry into what makes us us. And I remember doing that where we're all in a circle of trust and we're sharing what has been some of our most evocative memories and what brought us here, whatever challenges we're facing. We do this. And I think that kind of act, when you come in and you're self reflective on what you came here to do, almost creates maybe initial settings of the foundations of a deeper relationship. But I think at that point in time, I would wager that many of the people who were in that situation, because it seems so unnatural to whatever you would have experienced in another workplace, would have felt like, yeah, why do I have to do this when I do my job? And I think over time it works. I think we also discovered it like over time. It was not practice earlier on, but now I think increasingly we do that, like to kind of make sure that people have permission to bring their personal into the workplace. So we know each other at a deeper level than rather the roles that we play.
Even with our clients, when we have experimented this, it has worked magic. I mean, and there is what 2 decades of experience on data that we have. It works. I remember, I think Vijay and Rajesh was part of a visioning exercise for a real estate client. And it was not a typical visioning exercise where you do it in the boardroom, rationally ask question what home means, and what will happen if you disappear. What is the contribution to the world? I mean, sometimes a very rational question, and you tend to articulate it from your conscious head. Uh, and I remember they took them through a farmhouse in Alibag. I mean, the client was based in Bombay, and overnight it was a day before the visioning was supposed to happen. They played cricket, and evening they all sat together and they talked about what home meant to them and the stories about home. One, it becomes extremely powerful because it's based on your personal experience, and that again allows people to come together and connect each other. And finally, when the vision came in, it was not a well drafted word picture, but it was a feel about what home should be. And compared to that home experience in a metro city like Bombay, people don't experience that. So what can I really do about it? In terms of gardens, in terms of ceilings, in terms of square foot, in terms of being sensitive to kids and older people, all of that, which came from Because when you dwell into your personal stories and you empathize, is when you will do something powerful.
Mm.
And this is senior leadership. Senior leadership who you won't think who will sit and tell stories. And this we have tried client after client, and we have seen how it produces magic.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this personal experience relate only experience, or do we also bring hobbies, for example? I mean, many of us will be
Oh,
having hobbies very.
very much, Vijay. I mean, hobbies are also personal experience, right? It is your interest and hobbies. It can be in any area. It can be in art, poetry, climbing, your entire cycling. I mean, it can come from any of those areas. In fact, I feel your interests and passions are a very, very rich bucket. And I think that's the reason why there is a saying that you live a richer life, your work will become that much more richer. So it's important that you cultivate hobbies, you cultivate interests, you take off from work. So when we go for a research trips, we go to different towns, and by 5, 6, at least some of us, will take off, and then we'll have to experience the city. We have to go and wine and dine and look around, and all of that is an important part of it. You should definitely take holidays. You should take breaks. So all of that are a part of experiences. So in a way to really sharpen your uniqueness, you can just say that I'm going to craft my experiences. I'm going to capture my experiences, but I'm also going to craft what I'm going to experience in the next in my future, and then there'll be a lot of lessons from there.
And I think that is equally applicable whether you work in the creative, well, every work is creative, but let's say in the generally understood creative spaces, or you're working in industrial spaces, or you're working, if you're a coder working at night, it applies to, it is cross discipline. I don't think it's just meant for a few. I think our own personal interests, what we have cultivated, what we have spent time on, what we have experienced, has some bearing on our work for sure if we let it happen. I don't think it's only in certain contexts or not. Contexts will present themselves. Our brains will make the connections. But like Dilip said, we owe it to ourselves to succeed in our careers to have a rich life. Not just, by the way, have a rich life in the careers or something else. It actually impacts that, what you choose to do in your work. Are there any more questions, Vijay?
No, I think.
Anybody wants to just spontaneously ask something, you can raise your hand. We have a couple of minutes before we close the session.
I'm assuming they can unmute themselves, right?
Some folks may not be. I'm just trying to make sure and check if everybody is.
Yeah, check. Talking is permitted for everyone. You can unmute and ask questions directly.
I think Surata had one more question. So I'm wondering, can I learn the skill by being more reflective, having conversations with self, or as Dilip said, maybe write about it, or maybe in some other way, without vocalizing, could this work, or you feel otherwise?
The way I have practiced is it's actually to write it like stories. So, see, normally people do that during catharsis. You've gone through an experience and then you want to write it down. But let's say that you take it like a project. I want to really decode who I am. Okay. And the way to look at it, just look back spontaneously. You may find that there are 10, 15 experiences which is very, very sharp and defines you. It can be positive or negative. And you just write down that, like a story, what happened. Okay. And then you tend to reflect back on saying what really made that happen. So that is where you start distilling principles. So the example of the teacher that I talked about, and in that story, in my life story, the teacher is a very important part of my story. And so when I write down, I'm writing down how interesting it was, how I really felt that those years, etc. And then I'm asking the question that what made that happen, which normally is decoded in the subconscious because it comes it becomes useful to us in a very subconscious way. There are moments that it will come out, but if you practice it consciously, then what happens is that you have this large box of chocolates like experience. And then when a life situation happens, you can actually pick up one of those chocolates and refer back to it. There are people when they read books. I mean, some people completely, like I completely forget after I read books. So anything interesting about a character or a quote, I actually start putting down in a diary. And that diary has now got maybe 5-6 years of things that I've gone through. So anytime I got a reference on a project, I can actually go back to it, and I will pick and choose things which I think may be useful. You know, so the starting point is it's just. I think the biggest thing you realize that when you write the story, you find out how rich your life is. That itself changes your perspective about who you are, and that gives confidence and conviction for you to share the stories. When you don't do that, you feel your life is ordinary. I mean, that's what you look like, and you look at everybody else's life, and you feel that they are having a great life, and so your self confidence is pretty low to share your own experiences. I think that's the first step that you should do.
Now, it's 7 o'clock. If there are no more questions, then I'd like, I think there is one. We'll take one last.
Yeah.
This is from Navin. He says, a lot of my friends treat work as an exercise, a task, or a chore to be completed. However, their interests might be in completely different spheres. Does it make sense to suck it up and stay in a job role like that? Or do you guys feel that giving up that job to chase one's passion is the right thing to do?
So there is no straight answer to that. That becomes a call the person needs to take. I mean, there are just two options. One is obviously you get out and you chase your passion. The other option is to how do I make my work more interesting, and can I bring my experiences and understanding into the work so that work becomes more interesting. They say that this entire myth, the passion itself is a myth. It's created by somebody who became successful and then told the story to you by I followed my passion. But in reality, you started doing something and you start becoming good at it, and then that's how it happens. I mean, you start off somewhere. So if you take Scott Adams, who's the author of Dilip, I mean, the amount of jobs he have done. I mean, so he breaks this myth in his book, talk about by saying that he did a hotel business, many business, and finally, this is something which took off. He was authentic enough to say that because I mean he combined illustration and his understanding of business culture with humor, and then concocted and became delivered. So many times whatever you have, you start putting everything that you got and try to make it interesting and see what emerges out of it. And that is where I think the life experience, etc., could be useful. But if you have the courage and if you're very clear about it, you should follow the passion that you have.
I think that's the last of the questions. And thank you all for the questions. And thank you, Dilip, for a lively discussion on a very different kind of topic that we may talk, within center of gravity in bits and pieces. But I think the first time we had a discussion about this in this level of detail. I think it's a topic for all of us to explore.
I think
right? There is a lot that is unlocked that's hidden inside us. If we just gave the permission to unlock it.
We also trying to explore it, and we're thinking of maybe working around a course around this in terms of helping people, because it's easy, but because it's not a habit, you need maybe some formats and structured way of thinking to break from the current mode of thinking. And we are thinking of a course maybe to design around it from our experience and see where it takes us. But this was a beautiful start, to share our thoughts and take questions from all of you. So thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you all. Stay safe out there. Thank you everybody for joining.